Where would you like to start?
So
The
I,
world is your oyster
oh
with this.
boy. So I started with what was then Smith Barney in 1996. Born and raised in Denver, youngest of five kids, and a very raised by a very alpha father, loving and very alpha. And
What do
so
you mean when you say alpha?
he ruled the room. He owned every room he walked into, and taught many of us how to do that. And then my mother balanced it out by making sure that everybody in that room was happy and felt heard.
Hmm.
And so I
So she
went
had to throw your dad out of the room occasionally. I'm just
on
wondering how that
occasion.
worked.
On
No,
occasion.
usually she would ask him to go get another bottle of wine, or honey, go get hors d'oeuvres, or and he would happily comply, and because he appreciated that they made a really good team.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
so I think the balance, right, of and we talk often with advisors and people that we work with to not always be the one talking, more often be the one listening. And I often refer back to my parents. My dad was the talker, my mom was the listener. So together they made a great team, and they did it in a very respectful way. But anyway, so I knew they had something happen to them when I was in my late teens that um, pretty much decimated their finances. And it was because they hadn't planned for the unplanned, as that is so often the story, right? That this occurred, and it was no one's fault, right? It wasn't anybody's fault. But that was what I often ask when I'm working with an advisor or doing public speaking or whatever, what's your story, right? And so that is the reason why I became a financial advisor, is I never wanted anyone to have to go through that, if at all possible, for them to prevent it. So started my journey as a financial advisor, 100 dials a day. And for those who don't know, it means like picking up the phone and actually making phone calls. Mark gets it. Um, and
Mark
it's
has decades and decades of experience, so
I know
he
when
gets it.
the
That's
rotary
because
phones and
anybody over the age of 35
right.
started in this business doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
That by that I mean if he started more than 10
Yeah,
or 12 or 15
yeah,
years ago.
yeah.
Very
He
true.
started right out of college,
That was the model and that's how it worked. And
which was why I avoided it, by the way.
Mhm.
yeah, me too for
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, it got, so I had come, and again, I'm getting off track. I had come from selling long distance to businesses with a company then called Sprint. And so I learned very early on to not take the word no or click personally, right? When someone hangs up on you. Anyway, so I was well suited because I had a pretty thick skin, and I really, really, really wanted to make a lot of money. At that point, in my 20s, I really wanted to make a lot of money. So, and then needless to say, I was one of two women FAs in 150 FA office here in Denver. And but I didn't care. I was again raised by a male dominated family. That wasn't anything new or different for me.
Did you feel like they were excited to have you as a woman there, or did you feel like did you have to kind of push into that space?
Uh thank God it was a long time ago, so nothing I'm speaking to is gonna come back to bite me in the butt,
Sure.
people wise. Honestly, so my manager was very excited to have me. And I think, well, anyway, I don't want to say anything too politically incorrect, but the FAs saw me as a, young woman, you know, great, but really let's take her out for drinks and, whatever. Let's go have some, let's, go enjoy ourselves. And so was I empowered to be the best advisor I could be. Were people swarming around me wanting to share, great solutions and great ideas? And no, but the irony or maybe irony is not the best word. Back then, late 90s, that wasn't the mantra anyway. Male, female, it didn't matter. People didn't share. People were very territorial. They were very, they were, majority of people in our business back then were absolute jerks. I mean, they just really were,
Mm-hmm.
and very full of themselves. And um, honestly, I've been in the, again, I want to be careful. I don't mean to say that
Yeah.
everyone were jerks, but and especially in the wirehouse space, right? It was just very competitive, super territorial, and that was my career until really, for all intents and purposes, COVID. So I'm going to back up for a second, but before I do that, it was COVID that literally forced me, because I'd gone into coaching and consulting and public speaking at that point in time, but I was still doing all of that in the wirehouse space through Barron's and other things until COVID hit. And then COVID forced me to reach out to Ross Marino and Penny Phillips and I had become friends and got to know each other well through other situations. And so anyway, and I, through coming to Shift and through coming to, and getting to go to a lot of different independent industry conferences and online opportunities, I was introduced to a whole new world of the advisor space. And again, not that wirehouses are evil and everyone else is great. I'm not meaning to say that. Every human beings are changing, right? Age, gender, what have you. Human beings and communication is changing, which is awesome.
Awesome.
And so anyway, I'm talking in circles a little bit. But so let me go back. I was a wirehouse producer. We built a team of 12 people. In 2007, we had almost 2 billion in assets under management, and we loved our clients. They were wonderful, and by all accounts, I refer to it as my Facebook persona. Um, Everything looked great. And however, there were a lot of things that were going on both within my team, within our industry, that caused me to really struggle. I was in some situations, professionally, abroad the country, across the country, where I was not, I didn't have my own voice. I was required to fall into a communication style that was very much more transactional, less relationship driven. And it didn't feel authentic and conducive to who I was as a human being. And honestly, I wasn't appreciated. Not that it's about me being appreciated, it was always about our clients. But it wasn't until 2008, 2009 when I won an award for being one of the top 5 people to close referrals in all of UBS. And people who knew me even said, "Oh, I guess you do know what you're doing." And I was just like, wow, you know, because we work so often, we work with people that if you don't do it their way or the way they feel it's accurate and correct, and then it's wrong.
Yeah.
And so in 2010, for many, many, many different reasons. I left the industry. I took some time off, and a lot of it was stress related. And so, thank you to Jason Lahita is another person who there's so many people now in our industry, men and women, who are talking about stress as so that it's not taboo, right? It's not taboo to talk about having a tough time. It's not taboo to talk about imposter syndrome or any of the things. But just a mere 10 12 years ago, 10 years ago, hey, yesterday, for many of us it felt taboo to talk about stress. So I left the industry for a while, and I was in a very, very dark place. And I felt like I had failed, even though I knew I hadn't. But at that point in time, I felt that way. And there's a lot that I'm not talking about, but it just is. I want this conversation to serve the majority of the listeners, so that they know that if they are experiencing stress, or if they are experiencing some issues that are causing them to second guess themselves, to any extreme, get help, talk to people, don't feel alone, find other people, because there are so many people who are struggling, and know that you're not alone. I was not raised in a family that believed in therapy. And so for me to actually go and find a therapist was a big deal. And of course, the first few and I was not due respect, I was not a woo-woo person. And people are like, well, what does that mean? To me, I had to find a therapist that resonated with me and who I was. And I was very lucky to find one. And I was also very lucky to find Brene Brown. And Brene Brown, Adam Grant, they speak my language, and they resonate with me a great deal. And actually in 2014, I was extremely honored to get to go and work with Brene Brown's team. And it literally changed my life, you guys. To have the opportunity to speak about vulnerability and to own it, not run away from it or be ashamed. To be able to, the work that I did with them was really when I finally realized what I had been trying to do the previous, half of my career, 15 years, wasn't wrong. It was different, maybe, than a lot of other people, but it wasn't wrong. And so after I went back and I had my CFP and my SEMA and all of that, I went back and got my behavioral finance certification through CFP, because, and that was, again, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, very sort of different and nuanced. I'm very happy that it is no longer.
Yeah.
And it was the people that I worked with through the Brene Brown Dare to Lead organization who encouraged me to come back into the financial industry as a coach and speaker and everything. I always knew I loved public speaking. I got to do actually quite a bit of public speaking as an advisor. We were blessed to win several Barron's Awards and whatnot, and was invited to do public speaking at those conferences. So, what do we do when we come back and when we get into a new venture, and, we're like, okay, what are the biggest pain points of the people that we're hoping will be our audience? And at that point in time, it was predominantly advisors and management as well. And so I went to good old Google, and the thing that kept coming up when I said, okay, what are the biggest challenges? It was the Great Wealth Transfer. Duh, right? So the first thing I did was, okay, Great Wealth Transfer means family, means different generations, different genders, and communication. And so what are the things that the different generations? So the first thing that I did was find and study everything I could get my hands on have as many conversations as I could about different generations and how different generations feel about money, whether it be from the perspective of advisors or the perspective of investors. And I was thrilled to see, maybe that's the wrong way to say it. I was thrilled that there was such a disparity because it meant an opportunity, selfish
Yeah.
for us, right? To
Yeah.
get to help and teach and provide a service. And same with genders, right? Men and women. And I don't mean to put people in buckets because everyone are individuals, but there are differences and there are ways now to do discovery to figure out, okay, based upon age, based upon gender, based upon the patriarch in the family of investors, the matriarch, the family, there are different communication styles, different techniques to build trust, different discovery questions, just different ways to show up for those people. And that's our job, right? Is to show up. For me, it's my job to show up for, the advisors that I get to work with, or management that I get to work with, or, whomever hires me to help them build trust and to help them break the logjam in the lack of communication that's occurring for whatever reason, right? We all have reasons we get in our own way. And there are so many ways to just talk with people to help us get out of our own way. And I think the biggest, I've been talking for a long time, the biggest thing that I really want, if there's a few things that people come away from this recording hearing, is I want them to hear you are not alone. No matter what you're experiencing and how you're wanting to handle it, if you know that what you're doing is the best thing for your clients, don't give up. Maybe, figure out doing it a different way, and get help. But just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong, especially when you know that it's serving people. The other thing is when many of us are haunted every day by imposter syndrome, right? Who the heck are we to get to, go out and tell our story and help people? And who do we think we are that we know something that someone else is going to want help with, right? All of us go through this. The best of the best, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, all of the best, they go through it. And just again, I guess, don't give up and keep striving to be the best you can be. And if you are not happy where you are, or you're not happy with the people that you're working with, there are other people out there. I don't mean to say it's easy to make a change, or that you should make a change. But don't silence your voice. And Jess, you and I talked about this a lot. For both of us, don't silence your voice because you feel you have to. Work with someone to help you figure out how to be heard in a way that others will want to hear you. I guess I'm being a little bit vague, happy to get more specific, but find your authentic, confident voice first. And then when you're going into negotiations, or you're working with your clients, or you're working with your team, figure out how what you want to say is going to affect them, be a win-win for them. And you'll be surprised, and pleasantly surprised often, how much more they welcome your communication and your conversations. And I know I went in 5 different directions in that 20 minutes or whatever it was, but I hope it was helpful.
No, good. I loved it. I have many
I
questions. I'll let Mark go first before I jump in with all my questions.
Okay, I'm officially going to be quiet now.
Nope, you have to talk again. We're just going to ask a question
For
or
about
two.
30 seconds, you might be. Jess, as I'm sure you're aware, I took some notes there. Um, I think I want to list a little more. I want to hear what you have to say. Jess, fire
Me?
away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, what I think I heard you say, and I'll say it back, and you can tell me whether or not it's accurate. Is you had a skill for let's look at both sides of the coin. You had a skill for understanding how to get people to say yes. On one side of that coin, you could have taken your career down a path that was extremely manipulative for the end client. And I imagine in a lot of those situations, supervisors and big firms and people who wanted to make a lot of money were very willing to exploit that side of the coin. And at the same time, you knew you had a heart for a good, like a good heart that wanted to truly care for people. Some of that was cultivated by your own family experience, good parents, good environment, lots of, good authoritarian guidance while also lots of listening. And then this experience at home that left you realizing people can become financially insolvent through circumstances that are outside of their control. So you had a kind of a soft spot for how do I help really truly have a good heart, and I want to help people if possible get into the best situation they can be so that they can avoid this inside a context and a culture that saw dollar signs in you. And
Yeah.
I imagine that throughout that journey, there was a ton of tension around what they were telling you. You could be this, you could do this, you could have this. All you have to do is just turn on that skill. And the people that you're serving are smart enough. They can figure out what they need. All you got to do is just let them make the decision. You don't need to make the decision for them. Because I've heard that too.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very accurate. You're spot on and very intuitive. And the industry then, and still is to some degree, but I think it's changing a bit
Yeah.
for the better, in my humble opinion. It's less transactional. Back then, it was so transactional, and
Because you had a family, you had people depending on you. There was a reason to be financially
yeah,
not just solvent, but I mean, you had kids, college, home, cars, all the things. There's
yeah,
a reason to need to make money.
yeah. I did. I had this internal struggle of the term keeping up with the Joneses, right?
Yeah.
Wanting the better house, the better car, all the things that I saw other people have, but not wanting to, just not ever being comfortable doing something that I couldn't get behind or look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day. Conversations I couldn't, if I couldn't sell myself on something, I sure as heck wasn't going to sell someone else.
Yeah.
And were there times one could argue I was wrong? Absolutely. Of course. Did I often have to tell myself and remind myself, Julie, this isn't about you, it's about them. And so, especially as I got older in my career, I'm like, all right, am I doing this because it's giving me fear and trepidation? Am I holding back, and am I ingratiating myself too much into this decision making? And do I need to back off and do what's best for them? And, I got old enough and wiser that I knew when to kind of have that boundary and be like, okay, selfishly, I wouldn't do this, but their risk tolerance, their situations, their what have you, says go for it. They know all the things, they want to do it. Anyway, there was enough, and there was enough. What was really hard too, Jess, was there were enough times in meetings in front of clients or in front of peers that I was told that my way of doing things was wrong. And, there's a way to handle it, right? You can handle it privately. You can have the discussion privately. Don't do it in front of peers. Don't do it in front of clients. It's very unprofessional. It's very degrading. It really broke my spirit. It really, really broke my spirit. And sadly, I still see that happening with teams that I coach, market execs, advisors, doesn't matter. And so it's figuring out, okay, how do you advocate for yourself? How do you stand up without being disrespectful? And because I didn't know how to do that then, or I didn't know how to do it in a way that would capture their attention, right? And that's the difference, is figuring out how to, if you know that what you want to fight for, advocate for has meaning and has value, then figure out how to say it to the person where it's going to resonate with that person. And they're going to hear why it's important and why it benefits, multiple people. And that's what the difference is. I think it wasn't about me. Make it about the client, because that's what it's about. Make it about whomever the end user is. Make it about them. And it oftentimes people will hear that a lot better. So yeah, it was a lot. There was a lot of inner challenges, and I stayed way too long. A lot of reasons why, but I stayed way too long. And I wake up every day today, even though I started from scratch, and yeah, it was scary as hell. And Mark mentioned before we started the recording today, and my son, God, this was, 17, he's 17 years old. He sees other people, other adults working in jobs that they really don't like, as many do, but they bring home a really nice paycheck. And he's seen me struggle. He's seen me, build a business, and then COVID hit, and holy shit, got to start from scratch again. And, now things are great, but, I'm not stupid enough to think that something else might not come and take the wind out of my sails again. And he's like, Mom, I really respect what you've done. And to have my 17-year-old son say that is like, holy cow.
You're lucky he's even speaking to you, but that's a whole other conversation.
I agree.
Did you say, that he's speaking to me? Right.
Yeah.
My daughter, on the other hand, no.
I'm
20, so we're past that, thank God.
Those girls.
Yeah, we all have stories. My son refused to let my wife go on college trips, on college, visitations, and it broke her heart. But at that point in time, he just didn't want to hear what she had to say.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a tough time, and it took a lot of communication between the two of us to manage that whole process. Just speaking of communications, the other thing that I heard loud and clear, and I know it from my own experience. You referenced it back, right? Because I drop kicked a very successful career. I literally just drop kicked it over a weekend. Because my son was having some challenges, and he was 9 years old, and he'd never seen me during the week. Mm-hmm. And so we all make choices. But what I had concluded more than anything else is this is no negative on the firm I was with, but the culture and personality of that firm was not who I was. And I heard you say something very similar there. And it took a long time, and meeting Ned Hallowell actually, to learn that different is not equal to wrong. And that if you search, you can find a set of peers who think the way you do.
Yes.
And then you found a home.
Exactly right.
And in this business, it wasn't my first firm, and it wasn't my second firm. It was my third firm. Mm-hmm. And none of that was easy, but it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And you highlighted that, you need to work through it until you find the place where you can speak your voice, your way.
Yeah.
And you have choices, right? I mean, you can take, quote, the easy path and stick in your high paying role and grind it out until you have enough to, thumb your nose at society financially. That's one way.
Yeah.
Some of us chose a different way. But what you just also articulated, just very practically, uh, given the impact of COVID on you in particular, and whatever happened to your parents, is keeping an overfunded cash reserve is never a bad idea.
No.
No. I have a
Protect yourself.
question for you both, kind of to piggyback on top of what Mark just said. And I can relate because I've certainly had to have my own push through spirit along the way. What are some ways that help? What are some things that helped you push through? And for me, what I'm specifically asking about with that question is like daily things. I've had moments where I'm in a job that's unfulfilling and I don't even want to get out of bed in the morning to go do that job. Like it, what do you do? And like, what is something that worked for you to make it through those really tough times?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
So for me, it was finding literally the right authors, the right podcasts, I'm a listener as opposed to a reader. Different people enjoy content in different ways. For me, it was putting on literally the right podcast, the right audio book, the right song. A lot of times it would be watching old Friends episodes, things that would just literally make me laugh. Um, and for me, oftentimes when the imposter syndrome would rear its ugly head, I would go back to people that I knew were similar in values, similar in thinking, that had become successful, and be like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. What do I need to be doing that's different? Because for me, Jess, often it was me that got in my own way. I reacted too strongly to something that somebody said, or I didn't have a thick enough skin, or in fact, excuse my language, they are an asshole, but I can't change that. So what control do I have? Because at the end of the day, I got to get up. I got to, earn my paycheck, or, for me, I'm self-employed. I got to show up for my clients. I've got to do my marketing outreach. I got to do the things, because if I don't, it's me that it's negatively affecting. And so why should I let that person negatively affect me when really it's me negatively affecting me? And trust me, there were plenty days when I didn't get out of bed. And it took a really long time. And man, COVID was a really, 2020 worst year business wise ever. Super scary, right? And I think it just was talking to people. It was literally, LinkedIn was my savior, and networking with people and talking to people. And anyway, that's kind of that was my thing. And different things work on different days too. Have you noticed that? I mean, literally different things work on different days. So it's like, okay, if the first thing isn't working, then try something else. And you know what else too? There were days that I didn't get out of bed and I slept or whatever. And the next day I felt better. So if you have a choice and you're just like, I need to take a day, and you have that convenience, maybe sometimes give it to yourself. Just let yourself take it and try again tomorrow. Mark, what do you think?
There's a quote that I think is attributed to Thomas Edison, but I believe it actually goes back to Ben Franklin. That was something around the order of, I haven't failed, but I have tried 10,000 things that didn't work. And I have learned to live by that, actually. I don't know when I adopted it. It was a long time ago. But just to go back to the original question, there were certainly days in the last 2 or 3 years of my consulting career when I didn't want to get out of bed. I just had enough. Every Monday, every Sunday night or Monday morning, I got on an airplane and I had a migraine, and I would pop some migraine medication, and I would be like, I don't know what I'm going to do to get through this day, but I'm just going to get through the day. And eventually I got to the point where I was like, I just cannot do this anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't do this. And so what I would say to you is, it's, Carl Richards espouses this, where, the incremental, the little micro action, the next best thing, or the next right thing that you think in the moment. And I mean, when I left the consulting firm that I was with, my next best thing was to go into the startup world and make $1 gazillion, in an IPO. And I actually got fairly close to that, but it doesn't matter. That wasn't the right thing either. And I eventually learned that the right thing was working for myself, because what I learned is I do think differently. I'm pretty neurodiverse. That has its pluses and minuses, but it was unlikely in a large organization, in an institution, that I was going to find a comfortable spot. And once I realized that was very freeing. Now, there was a lot of stress. I had a significant amount of overhead. I'd built up a lifestyle. There was a lot of stress in that. And also, fortunately, I didn't grow up with much. So when I started making, fairly serious income, I saved a lot of it. In hindsight, I didn't save nearly as much as I should have, but that's neither here nor there. I saved enough of it that I could take a couple of years and try and create something. Yeah. And, and I did. Now, there's still, during the process of building a firm, I wrote a piece, you can see it in my Substack, called Career Suicide, that go a little more in depth than I will at the moment. But there were certainly times when I wrote paychecks out of my own pocket and didn't pay myself. And let's just say that my wife was less than happy with that. But I believed in what I was doing, and I knew it was the right thing for me. And eventually it worked out. But I call it the 15-year overnight success. Right? You identify with that, Julie, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
You talked about it earlier, your Instagram life or your Facebook life, right? There are so many people we see, especially on social media today, that have this curated life. Yeah. And it looks wonderful. And, and we know this from being an advisor, right? You dig under the covers with your clients, right? And we end up knowing and you do as a coach, I'm sure, with the advisors you coach. You learn about what they're really doing, and you're like, oh my God, you don't express that, but it's like, oh boy, we have work to do. But that's the value, right? That's what we get out of it.
Yeah.
Is doing the work and helping people through all these things. Because realistically, if nobody had problems, there would be no need for us. If everybody knew how to save properly, and everybody knew how to invest, it's not like this stuff is rocket science.
Well, and we do it with no judgment, right? Or
with no judgment. That's the key, right? I never judge anything.
Been there, screwed up so many things. I'm not going to judge you.
Even if I haven't, I'm not judging, because I don't have your context. That's the other thing I've
100%.
learned. Nobody has the other person's context. Nobody.
And don't assume.
And I look at our political environment today, and I see all the noise, and I'm like, look, I know what I'm doing, and I know what I believe in, but I'm not going to criticize you. I may disagree with you vehemently, but I'm not going to criticize you.
Right.
Because I don't know your context. Right. I don't know how you arrived to where you arrived at. No matter how wrong I might think you are. Because guess what? You think I'm just as wrong.
Yeah.
So much of that context is embedded in the beliefs
Yes.
that people have, that are cultivated through years and years and years of experiences.
How about when you're a kid and you don't even know that you're learning stuff?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Go read
I
your
mean,
Daniel Goleman and all the things you learn between the ages of 2 and 8 that you have no
no
idea
idea.
that
No
that's being
idea.
embedded in you.
No idea. So many people with savings problems.
Mhm.
It tracks back to a belief.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It doesn't track,
Or
the
childhood
behavior.
trauma
The
Experience.
or any
behavior comes out of that belief that they don't even realize that they have. And that belief might be, no matter how much I save, I'm never going to feel okay.
Yep.
Mhm.
And if that belief exists and is tucked down inside them, then guess what? They're not going to prioritize savings
Mhm.
Right.
because
Or
in
I'll
their
take it the other
mind,
way. We have a client who had open heart surgery at a very young age.
Mhm.
And that client is now late 50s, but they still don't believe they're going to live very long.
yep,
So they spend every penny.
yep,
And I'm talking about somebody who makes $750,000 a year. And there's a constant battle with at what point are you going to stop working?
Yep.
And how are you going to fund that?
I'm
Yeah.
going to find that.
Just very practically. Again, no judgment on my part.
Yeah.
I get how they got to where they are and I get what their belief set is. But the facts don't bear out what their belief set is.
Well, and
They
it,
keep
You know what's
living.
stronger? But you know what's stronger? The belief.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The belief.
And it's our job to help them to try to
Right.
first get their trust, right? Because nothing's without trust. And then help them try to see beyond or outside of their belief. What
Their
is?
belief system to what the facts are and what they represent. And again, this client is right. They might die tomorrow. It's true of all of us, right?
Right.
The problem is, what if you don't?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And is that the way you want to
Plan.
live? And this is actually the conversation we have at least once a year.
Yeah.
Is you do live past your working years, unless you do something, here's how you're going to have to live.
Yep.
Mhm.
If that's okay, great. You made that trade.
Yep. No.
And that is a conversation we have on a regular basis. It's tough.
It was tough.
Yeah.
And it's hard not to insert our own beliefs into that.
100%.
That's the challenge. And that to me is the difference between a good advisor and an average advisor.
Totally. It's not
I'm
about
not saying
that.
they're bad. They may be giving good advice.
Yeah.
But if you can't craft it in a way that your client is going to understand it, you can't be a great advisor.
Right.
No chance.
Mm-mm.
Julie, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
As you look back over your career, what
Which
would you
isn't finished.
say do you have a high point and a low point that stands out, or a couple if you can't come down on one?
You know, I am so lucky. I think my high point is now.
No.
I mean, it really, really is.
Can I ask how old you are?
Yeah, I'm 54, almost 55.
When do you
Took
feel
me-
like you moved into that high point space age-wise?
Literally in the last 6 months.
Okay.
I mean, no joke. Through a lot of blood, sweat, tears, hard work, and wonderful, wonderful people such as yourselves. You know, couldn't do it without others, right? And so much of it, I think, is learning, you know, and it takes a really long time. Relationships take a really long time, and trusting that, you know, and this is so I realized probably 10 years ago that because we're all in sales in some way, shape, or form, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally realized that I was not technically a salesperson, I was a resource, I was a solutions provider. And when I realized that as I was an advisor, my whole brain, it was, you know, epiphany, paradigm shift, whatever you want to call it. my whole brain and the way I approached things shifted because I realized it wasn't a quota. It wasn't the stress of what have you done for me lately, you know, blah, blah, blah. It was the balance of knowing that what you're providing for your client or your prospect is the best thing for them because you've done the due diligence, you've built the trust, you've had the conversations. And then it's making sure, Mark, to your point, that they understand why it's the best thing for them. That nobody cares if we understand it. We better understand it. That's table stakes. That goes without saying. They need to understand it and to make sure that they understand it. Again, I keep saying the word trust, but they have to trust us. B, know that we've done the due diligence to figure out what is truly going on for them and their families, and then done also the due diligence just to understand their past. You know, what's their money story from when they were younger, to get a sense of how they feel about money. Does it make them feel joyful? Does it make them feel stressed out? Does it make them feel scared to death? You know, what is it? And as much as we can, why? And then with all of those things, it's a relationship. And you don't have to close the business right away. So I teach a lot of companies, I teach recruiting. And they're like, well, I need to get the meeting right away. I need to, do this right away. Well, okay, you probably feel that you do, and corporate probably is telling you that you need to. But in fact, putting yourself out there, introducing yourself, putting yourself out there as a resource for them to come to talk about things is going to make them want to talk to you more. Anyway, it just is. And then, so that's the high points have been, I think, when I was able to show up at conferences authentically and not worry, and just relax, right? And just show up. Yes, do you want to get the business cards or the QR codes or whatever? Of course you do, because you want to have your pipeline and all the things. But when you do it authentically because you truly care, it's very, very different than doing it with an agenda. And it's maybe easier for us now further into our career to get to do that. Number one. Number two, the low point, to answer your question, Jess, was when I left UBS, because again, it was for a lot of different reasons. But I was scared to death, felt like crap, felt like I had failed.
What year was that?
2011. And I talk about not getting out of bed. I literally went through depression. I mean, there's no doubt about it in my mind. And took a long time to dig my way back out of that. And
early
I feel
40s?
very, very lucky that I did. Pardon?
Early 40s?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. 2 little kids at home, whole bit. So it was hell, and maybe that hell makes us appreciate even more where we are now, right? And I think when we work with younger advisors or younger people or younger investors, for that matter, they don't yet have that perspective, right? And so we need to remember that when they talk in a way that we don't feel serves them best, maybe there's a little too much ego, or maybe there's a little too much. I've heard a lot of people use the word entitled. Rather, it's our job as older. Jess, you're not that much older, but you're older. It's our job to listen to them, not bitch at them, and just say, think through things from the perspective of other people other than just your own. Because when you do that and you really truly do that with an open heart, you're going to understand where they're coming from, which may be able to help you understand where you're coming from. And when I went through the hell of the people, some of the people, when I finally realized I needed to look at things from their perspective, it helped me get closure. It helped me heal from some of that and move on.
I just want to highlight something before we close out. You just said open heart, not open mind. Was that intentional?
No.
I think there's some in the having had a few conversations with mental health professionals myself, the words you use matter a lot.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I'm going to ascribe that there was a bunch of meaning to you saying open heart and not open mind.
Good catch. I like that. That just gave me goosebumps, actually.
Well, there's a post-it on my monitor that says what you say to yourself matters the most.
So true. Couldn't agree with that more.
I'm not kidding.
We are our own worst critics, our own worst enemies, all the things. We are all so hard on ourselves.
All high performance people are.
Yes.
It's been my experience.
Agreed.
And we tend to be very introspective as well. But I find what I find most interesting about this whole podcast is, for whatever reason, we are attracting a set of people that has landed in a very similar spot. There are things that we believe in that we're willing to do, and things that we don't believe in that we're not willing to do. And because of that, almost all of us are self-employed.
Isn't that funny?
Now, we may have built an institution around us. And right, I'm part of a 30-person firm now, but I'm not part of a 6,000-person firm.
Right.
And so we tend to curate our own environments.
Yep.
Is an observation, and you have done so for yourself, which is I just find it interesting. I don't think we set out to do that.
Yeah.
And I wrote down some people that I hope we'll get a chance to talk to. I mean, I've met Mark before. I can't pronounce his name properly. You know, I've met Jason before. I have not met Brene Brown. I would be more than honored to get any or all of them on here talking about their own stories. And I realize we haven't.
Tough, but
I'm aware of that, and getting any of them would probably be hard.
Yeah.
But it also occurred to me, Jess, that what we have not done is talk to Joy Leary, and we really ought to.
Yes.
Another fabulous mind. My goodness.
Oh my God. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, let's make that happen.
Oh, I'm not certain I could make it happen, but I believe that if either one of us made the request, it would happen.
Yeah.
I think so, but I'm not egotistical enough to say I know I could make it happen.
What he's saying that he didn't say, Julie, is that, or I think this is what I hear is, and because I see it too. You and Joy have the same spirit.
Oh, wow. What a compliment.
Well, that's a very powerful thing to say. I hope that to be true.
Yowza. Thank you.
I do know that one of the other sayings that is on my monitor that I 100% stole from a conversation that I had with Joy. And it was about,
what did it say?
Ultimately, self-worth and imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
It says, thank you for being.
For being.
You don't need any other thing other than who you are.
Yeah.
Is my interpretation of that.
Man,
make something of your existence, and that's all that needs to be done.
We could
whatever that is.
Our younger selves, right?
How about that? How about that when I was a 22-year-old auto mechanic, going to Georgetown and drinking 5 nights a week?
That's right. Go back and hug that guy and tell him thank you for being.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Exactly right. Or a 3-time college dropout. But anyway, anything is achievable. It really and truly
Absolutely. Is. And we don't have to benchmark it based on anybody else.
That's a critical statement.
Yeah. We benchmark it on what's right for us.
Right.
And our families.
I remember the managing partner of my first firm when I took the CFP exam and my score was like 96.
You got a score.
And
You're old enough to have gotten a score, Mark.
that's correct. That is correct. Thank you for that. I'll take that as a compliment. I made it this far. But in any case, his comment back to me was, "You studied too hard."
Oh, wow.
Now this guy, all he cared about was sales. I mean, if you had been part of this agency, he would have 100% leaned on you all day long to go close people.
Yep.
I don't want you to do anything but go close people.
I was told, Julie, you're taking too much time talking to clients.
Right. Same thing. You studied too hard. I'm like, you know what? I value knowledge. I can tell you what my partners say to me now is that I'm just a relentless learner.
Yeah.
Because that's who I am.
Right.
I mean, if you look on my desk, it's books. I'm a reader. And you said, you listen to podcasts and got yourself through tough times. I read and I listen to music. Mm-hmm. Music can get me through anything.
Yep.
Literally.
And time.
Thank God for electronic devices with music.
Yes.
I made a lot, speaking of old, I burned a lot of CDs, and before that made a lot of cassette tapes.
Yeah. You're not that old. I did cassette tapes too.
At one point I had 1,300 albums.
Holy crap.
Wow.
I'm a music nut.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, I'm really old. So turntables, amplifiers. But anyway, Julie, what else would you like us to hear about how you got here before we call it a day?
Don't ever give up. And I know so many people, that's not anything new or different, but, and just because somebody says no today doesn't mean that they won't say yes in a year. Too. I've been blessed with, and always leave the door open and mean it, right? If I can help you in this way, please let me know. And then when they let you know, follow through, bring the value. Samantha, Russell, so many people in our business, they just give. Penny's another one. They just give and give and give, right? And it's like, okay, the tide will turn, and it's giving without expecting anything in return, and hoping, certainly, maybe, but just really showing up.
Yeah.
And this, another thing is, this industry is filled with a lot of people, but it is a very small world, right? I mean, there are so many people that know each other. I mean, Kevin Bacon's 6 Degrees of Separation's got nothing on this.
I agree.
Yeah. And
it's
in a lovely, lovely way. And one of my high points now is getting to go to conferences and seeing people that I just have truly become to adore. And I'm missing Jess on the conference circuit. But anyway, it's just, it's been, this latter few years has really been a blessing. Learned a lot along the way the entire time. But it's been truly a blessing. So don't give up and don't feel alone. Just know it's going to be okay eventually. So not to end it on a dour note or a sad note, but it just, if we can make it through, so can anyone. A lot of hard work, perseverance. Oh, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know, will you help me, or will you teach me, or, this isn't working. Will you help me think this through a different way and do it a different way? Man, I tried to do everything myself for so long when I first started my business. And it just was, talk about feeling like a failure. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to use the credit card every once in a while, even as scary as that is. So anyway, I just gave you 10 things. You asked for one. I gave you too many. Sorry.
There's no such thing as too many, and no apology.
Thank you, Julie.
We
It's been
appreciate
so
it.
much fun. Yay. Thanks, you guys, so much.
We hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have never had, up until this point in time, any conversation with you. So I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
You too, Mark. We met once very, very briefly.
Very briefly. Yeah.
2 years ago, but
Yeah.
it was very briefly. So can't wait to give you a hug next time I get to see you.
And now you know that I'm a far worse person than you thought at the beginning, but okay.
Actually, I didn't know either way, so you're good.